What if there was no two-term rule for American presidents? What makes a democracy work? Is it the rotation of leadership or the continuity of vision? The two-term limit for U.S. presidents has been a defining principle of American politics since the mid-20th century. But what if it had never existed? Would the nation be stronger, more stable, or would the concentration of power have undone the democratic principles upon which America was built? In this thought experiment, we dive deep into the implications of removing the two-term rule, exploring how history, governance, and the balance of power might have been fundamentally reshaped. The two-term limit wasn't always a legal requirement. It began as a tradition set by George Washington, who voluntarily stepped down after serving 2 terms from 1789 to 1797. Washington's decision wasn't rooted in any written rule. It was a personal choice that became an unwritten standard. For over a century, this voluntary limitation was respected. Presidents like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison upheld the tradition, opting not to run for a 3rd term even when eligible. However, it wasn't legally binding, nor did every president abide by it without question. Ulysses S. Grant and Theodore Roosevelt both attempted non-consecutive 3rd-term campaigns, though neither succeeded. The tradition stood strong until Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency in the 20th century, setting into motion the debates that led to constitutional change. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, elected 4 times between 1932 and 1944, broke the long-standing tradition of stepping down after 2 terms. But his decision didn't originate from ambition alone. It was a response to extraordinary circumstances. The Great Depression and World War II created a climate where continuity in leadership seemed essential. Roosevelt's unprecedented 4 terms were seen by many as a necessity during these crises, helping steer the nation through formidable challenges. However, his extended presidency also raised alarms about the risk of wielding too much power for too long. Critics argued that no one individual, no matter how capable, should have such prolonged influence over the nation's direction. This ultimately led to the adoption of the 22nd Amendment in 1951, legally restricting presidents to 2 terms. But what if the response to Roosevelt's long presidency had been different? What if the U.S. chose not to impose limits, allowing any president to govern indefinitely as long as they maintained public support? To answer this question, we must explore both the historical what-ifs and the broader implications of such a possibility. Imagine U.S. history unfolding without a 2-term rule. What would the country look like? Let's consider how the extended presidencies of influential leaders might have shaped events. What if Washington had chosen to run for a 3rd or 4th term? His continued leadership might have firmly established a tradition of long-serving presidencies. Yet, it's equally possible that his prolonged authority might have created an early precedent for concentrated power, shifting America towards something closer to a monarchy. If Abraham Lincoln had lived to serve beyond his 2nd term, his extended presidency could have profoundly shaped Reconstruction. His vision for reuniting the nation with compassion and justice might have lessened the social and political tensions that plagued the post-Civil War era. Conversely, his prolonged leadership might have intensified opposition from Southern factions, potentially delaying unity. Roosevelt's progressive policies reshaped federal power during his presidency, tackling corporate monopolies and driving conservation efforts. If he'd held office beyond 2 terms, could his bold ideas have wholly transformed American society? Or would his vigor have encountered diminishing returns, leading to burnout or political stagnation? Leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt or Dwight Eisenhower might have approached their extended roles differently. Roosevelt might have cemented policies that shaped domestic and international affairs for decades, while Eisenhower's military and organizational expertise could have helped avoid Cold War escalations. While the potential for longer presidencies offers some appealing scenarios, the risks are significant. Democracy thrives on the peaceful rotation of power, ensuring no single leader dominates the political landscape. If presidents were allowed to hold office indefinitely, the balance of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches could be skewed. Situations could arise where a president accumulates overwhelming authority, sidestepping checks and balances. What begins as respectable leadership might devolve into authoritarian rule. Without term limits, political dynasties could become more entrenched. A popular president might dominate elections, discouraging competition and preventing new leaders with fresh perspectives from emerging. This scenario risks creating long-term stagnation that erodes the democratic process. Longer terms could lead to reduced accountability. A president no longer constrained by a timeline may prioritize consolidating political power over serving the public interest. Without the pressure of re-election, leaders might avoid addressing critical issues or neglect their responsibilities. Despite these risks, there are arguments in favor of extended presidencies in certain contexts. The ability to serve without term limits could bring potential benefits. In times of war, economic depression, or national emergencies, continuity in leadership can provide stability. A long-serving president would have the time and authority to implement overarching strategies without the disruption of a leadership change. Extended terms could allow presidents to pursue ambitious, long-term reforms. Many initiatives, especially in areas like education, infrastructure, or foreign policy, require years to bear fruit. With unlimited terms, presidents could focus on sustained progress rather than short-term gains designed to win elections. Election cycles often bring dramatic policy shifts between administrations with different ideologies. Longer presidencies might prevent the reversal of key initiatives, ensuring greater consistency in governance. A political system without term limits would undoubtedly alter the dynamics of elections and voter behavior. If the incumbent president frequently runs for re-election, challengers from both major parties may struggle to gain traction. Elections might become less about debating new ideas and more about affirming or rejecting ongoing leadership. Voter enthusiasm and participation could wane if the same candidates dominate the political landscape for extended periods. The absence of change might diminish public engagement with the democratic process. Without forced term limits, prospective leaders within a president's party may find fewer opportunities to rise to prominence. Political hierarchies may become more rigid, stifling innovation and diversity in leadership. At the heart of this discussion lies the question of whether term limits protect or hinder democracy. Term limits are designed to prevent the consolidation of power, promote leadership turnover, and ensure accountability. They embody the principle that leadership is a temporary trust, not a lifetime entitlement. However, the absence of term limits might not necessarily erode democracy, if balanced by strong institutions. If a well-functioning judiciary, robust Congress, and engaged electorate hold leaders accountable, extended presidencies could coexist with democratic principles. Yet, history teaches us that power, once concentrated, can be dangerously hard to disperse. This brings us to a philosophical debate. Is democracy better served by leadership continuity or by the regular infusion of new ideas through rotating leadership? Scholars and political thinkers often grapple with this tension, particularly in the context of long-serving international leaders. While some have fostered remarkable stability and progress, others have descended into tyranny. Finally, let's speculate on alternate scenarios. Could an unbroken string of presidential terms have prevented certain crises or created new ones? For instance, would longer leadership by Franklin D. Roosevelt post-WU2 have avoided the Cold War escalation? Or would unchecked power exacerbate conflicts? Could continued governance by Abraham Lincoln have prevented the rise of entrenched racism during the Reconstruction era, or would it have ignited further opposition? Would an extended presidency under John F. Kennedy have allowed for a smoother progression of civil rights legislation, or would prolonged centralization of power have stalled other agendas? These questions invite us to reimagine key historical junctures, offering speculative insights into the potential advantages and pitfalls of unrestricted presidencies. Without the two-term rule, the United States might look very different today. History could have been reshaped by extended leadership, for better or worse. While longer presidencies might promise greater stability and continuity, they carry the inherent risk of power, concentration, and democratic erosion. Ultimately, the two-term limit reflects a fundamental value of the American political system. Power is transient, and leadership is shared. Whether that restraint is an indispensable safeguard or an unnecessary obstacle to progress is a question worth debating. American democracy is, at its core, a constant balance. By exploring this what-if scenario, we are reminded of the fragility and strength of democratic systems. So, what do you think? Are term limits essential, or do they hinder the potential of great leadership in unprecedented times? Like and subscribe for more from History Twist.